Friday night at Bert's 50s Diner was a busy and warm early summer evening as dozens of people milled around the antique and historic cars on display. The gathering of car owners was a regular event at Bert's Drive-In, where people came as much for the car show as the classic diner food and atmosphere. As my son and I wandered around, the emergency frequency tones on the ever-sounding pager alerted for a fire. Soon, several fire trucks were rolling north from down the highway where Mechanicsville Volunteer Fire Department was holding its annual carnival on Maryland Wharton 5, past us at Bert's, when another message on the scanner noted that a body was found in a car and a nearby barn was on fire. I knew it was time to roll. One of my principal duties with my newspaper was covering police and fire calls, and this story encompassed both. We didn't have far to travel, as the fire was only about 3 miles north of us, just south of the well-known farmers' market. I pulled over on the shoulder of the divided highway, grabbed my camera, and quickly ran up the farm road to where a fire truck was next to a burning car and the burning barn, with several firefighters putting a quick end to the blaze. Mechanicsville Volunteer Fire Department Chief George Allen Hayden was standing near his chief's command sedan and talking on the radio. I asked the chief if it was true that a body was burning in the car. Without answering, Chief Hayden indicated with his thumb over his shoulder to an object behind him in the field. I was stunned to see the crisply burnt body of a human drawn up in an almost rising position due to the fire removing body fluids and tissue. The arms of the corpse were reaching upwards as if begging for help. Since most people, including myself, can go a lifetime without seeing such a sad and unnerving end to life, it would be an understatement to say I was shocked. Little did I realize then that those outreached arms are still reaching out, begging for justice, as no one has been held accountable for her death. Soon, additional fire units were arriving, and Chief Hayden instructed the body of the deceased person to be covered by a sheet, at which time I took this photo. A resident of the area was driving past the farm and spotted the car on fire, and knowing a state trooper was working security at the nearby McDonald's in Charlotte Hall, raced to the burger joint to notify the trooper. 2 young men were driving by and saw the smoke and were joined by tow truck driver Mike Holmes. The youths went running towards Holmes, yelling that a car was on fire, and so was a mannequin, and the mannequin seemed to be breathing. I ran up and looked at the mannequin. I told the kids that it was no mannequin. It was a body. I could see her breasts sticking straight up in the air, and her clothes must have been nylon. They had melted to her body. Her groin was still on fire, Holmes told me. One of the kids told me that there was a purse on the front seat. I grabbed it. He grabbed the edge of the strap, and we slid the purse out on the dirt road. When the state trooper came up, she pulled next to the burning car, said Holmes. I yelled at her to back her car up. It might explode. She jumped back in and almost went into a ditch. When Trooper Shelley R. Hollinger received the news of the fire where she worked security at the nearby McDonald's, she radioed the fire board to dispatch fire units. Trooper Hollinger then sped south down Route 5, arrived to find the barn on fire, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the trunk of her cruiser, and began to put the fire out when she noticed a person on fire nearby. Later, Holmes told me that while he and the young man had been careful not to handle the purse as they retrieved from the burning car, that Trooper Hollinger had picked up the purse with her bare hands, not wearing gloves. But one thing did make the tow truck operator stand still for yet another moment. When I looked at her body, I heard music. It was coming from the edge of the woods. I thought that was strange to hear music coming from the woods. I just decided to get out of there. No one asked me any questions. Holmes then left as the field and barn area filled with firefighters and curious onlookers. Holmes casually mentioned the events of that night to an out-of-county police detective who in turn filled in a Maryland State Police detective that then obtained a statement from Holmes. Holmes told me that there was one thing he would never forget: Trooper Hollinger leaning over the body of Sarah Marie Sapp and repeating, saying, "Can you hear me?" It was evident to the firefighters on the scene that the woman was dead. Her body was located about 50 feet from the burning car, and a small area of wheat in the field had burned along with her body. I had confirmed that there was a person dead. The fire was under control and had the beginnings of a story that even nearly 3 decades later is not complete. I went back to my truck out on the highway. The killer had done his work on that 26th day of June, 1992. Police identified the body as being that of Sarah Marie Sapp, 25, of Charlotte Hall, Memdeed, a young mother from the area who worked as a cocktail waitress in a bar located in a strip mall a few miles north of the Patuxent River Naval Air Station. Like many young people going through dramatic changes and challenges with raising and supporting young children, Sarah talked with co-workers at the bar about her life and ups and downs. She had 3 children by 3 different fathers and years of drug experimentation, and suddenly yet another relationship ended. All 3 of her children were adopted by her parents, who willingly stepped in to raise their grandchildren. Sapp had been living a life of free sex, hard drugs, and wild living, and now it was over. A frenzy of gossip was set loose from the now defunct bar in the Wildwood Shopping Center, located on Route 235 in California, MD. Many of those in the bar crowd insisted her death was an act of suicide. Co-workers readily told investigators, or anyone who would listen, that her death was self-inflicted. The bar was the center of life for many in the anything-goes party-hardy crowd in the area. The next day, the Maryland State Police detective in charge of the investigation, Sergeant Robert Rawlings, learned from the medical examiner that the preliminary cause of death was strangulation. Thus, the barflies and their associates might have made an argument for a person being able to set themselves on fire, though Sarah Sapp wasn't as likely to do so. Strangulation was definitely out of the question as a method of suicide. Rawlings told me that suspicious circumstances at the scene led the investigators to concentrate on treating the death solely as a homicide. The investigators had their work cut out for them, as the shift supervisor and the responding detective sergeant, Joe Casper, and TFCE. Eric Strucco had left the crime scene guarded only by yellow tape before going home. Anyone could have tampered with the crime scene that night, which could explain why no gas can was found on the scene of the murder. Fingerprints or DNA evidence could have been recovered from the missing gas can, but alas, The yellow tape couldn't stop the can from being whisked away that night, if indeed the killer didn't take it at the time of setting the fire. That incident of incredible incompetence on the part of the agency changed the way the Maryland State Police responded to major crimes forever. New criminal investigation units were set up around the state, and a squad of detectives flooded murder scenes after that, and no scene was left guarded by yellow tape in such a slipshod and embarrassing way again. Detective Strucco was a loose cannon with the public as a road patrol trooper, and had been assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division to keep him away from the citizens and cut down on complaints. In fairness to Strucco, the decision for him to stay on the scene that night, or to go home, wasn't his to make. A supervisor denied him overtime, a boneheaded type decision typical of the Maryland State Police at the time. Still, the shift sergeant, Joe Casper, could have assigned a road patrol trooper to guard the scene, but he didn't. Ironically, a few years later, Casper felt he had what it takes to be sheriff and ran for election, losing in the 1998 primary. Trooper Strucco was deeply affected by the murder, according to those who knew him, and kept a photo of the dead woman on his wall for years. As the Maryland State Police attempted to recover from blowing the investigation in the critical first 48 hours, the probe intensified into those whom she knew, dated, partied with, and her co-workers. Still, the barflies that worked with and patronized the tavern, called Nokelby's, where SARA worked, persisted with their theory of suicide, pointing to comments she had made the day of her murder, that she had quit another relationship along with 2 jobs. Those elbow benders in the bar were never ones to let facts get in the way of good gossip. The wild moods of SARA SAPP mirrored that of the lifestyle she led. Videotape of her buying gas to put in a gas can, for which police found a receipt showing she bought the can all on the day of her murder, continued to put fuel on the fire of this, was somehow a suicide. She had purchased gas at the Newmarket Texaco, just about a mile from where she was murdered. She told others she was going to end her life, and she offered to give away all of her money in the world, a little over $100 to a friend. The barn suffered only minor damage, and stood on the site as a silent grave marker for about 25 years before being razed. All the time the barn stood, it acted as a gaunt memorial and reminder to anyone that knew and cared for SARA SAPP that justice has yet to be done and her killer punished. The saga of the murder of SARA SAPP is filled with irony, contradiction, and confusion. Added to the mix was an enormous supply of local nutcases who began to imagine that they saw things. One crazy woman faxed a 4-page statement to me, declaring that she had memories of seeing a barn on fire, 2 people who were standing around, how she stopped to see if anyone needed help. She wrote about the men telling her that the exhaust of their car had started the fire, but they were using cleaning materials to put out the fire. Really? She also insisted that this had to be the scene of the murder, but noted that her vision was of a location a couple of miles away. Nonetheless, she went to see retired Maryland Fire Marshal Charles Donaldson, who himself would be the victim of homicide about 6 months later, and he arranged an interview with Maryland State Police investigator Mike Spaulding. Her musings could be verified, she said, if she were hypnotized. Nothing came of her lengthy statement, but but 26 years later, the fax copy of her account is still readable. That is unusual in of itself, given the fading nature of ink on fax paper. Funny how the words of a lunatic still are visible when most other fax documents from so long ago are not. Posters with the photo of SARA SAPP and a reward of $10,000 were circulated throughout the region. The murder investigation muddled on for 8 years, with a St. Mary's County Sheriff's deputy wandering into the case, which was bounced back and forth by various Maryland State Police detectives. The Washington Post referred to the inquisitive deputy as a rookie, and now retired Deputy Edward Canfield, who admits he was a new deputy at the time, was curious and found evidence that caused the state's attorney's office to put together a new probe. Not bad for a rookie. Then the new probe was headed up by Dan Morris, a retired homicide cop from Prince George's County, Maryland, and the investigator for the St. Mary's State's Attorney's Office. Morris had been hired just 2 years earlier for the very purpose of being able to put together cases in major crimes by State's Attorney Walter B. Dorsey. Dorsey had become disappointed with the politically driven agenda of the Sheriff's Department in the late 90s and realized it was time to hire an investigator to put together the pieces of a puzzle to enable successful prosecutions. Now, with a prime suspect appearing in the crosshairs of Morris, the investigation began to gather steam. Morris had built a successful case that sent several dirtbag bikers involved in the beating and death of a man at the Mousetrap Bar to prison. Morris now was working for Dorsey's successor, Richard Fritz, who took office in January of 1999. Indictments soon were filed by a St. Mary's County Circuit Court grand jury against Timothy Jameson, the brother-in-law of SAPP, and Clayton Victor Kissel as accessories after the fact to the crime. Kissel entered a guilty plea in Calvert County Circuit Court, where the case was moved as a change of venue and was prosecuted by Assistant State's Attorney Will Brahms on March 21st, 2000. Amazingly, the charge which Kissel said he was guilty of was to be an accessory to Wilson in the murder of SARA SAPP. Kissel never testified against Wilson in either of his 2 trials and was released and moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Born on March 24th, 1959, Kissel, originally from Riverdale, Maryland, was about 33 years of age when he admitted being an accessory to murder to Wilson. At the time of the murder, Kissel lived on Clark's Mill Road in Hollywood, Medad, on Deck 8, 1992. Kissel filed for bankruptcy to fend off collection efforts from a local hospital. On Deck 30, 1991, Kissel entered a guilty plea to battery following his arrest on Sept. 8, 1991, by Maryland State Trooper Charles Goldstrom. Kissel got a deal for 90 days in jail with all the time suspended. Keep in mind that the only person to do any jail time for the murder of Sarah Marie Sapp thus far was Clayton Kissel. Why did Kissel plead guilty to be an accessory after the fact to the murder of SARA SAPP by Christopher James Wilson? Kissel did so for the same reason all dirtbag druggies take a plea to avoid more serious charges, which would net him longer jail time than the 1 year he did in the St. Mary's County, MD, jail. Drug distribution charges were on the back burner for Kissel, a longtime doper, meth head, and PCP freak. Taking a plea was a no-brainer, given the mushhead Kissel had become due to his daily use of crystal meth and PCP. he would have made a terrible witness. The charges against Jameson were dropped for lack of evidence, and likely should never have been filed in first place. Prosecutors didn't intend for Jameson to be indicted, and had presented the entire case to the grand jury, and somehow they came up with a true bill indictment, which was not supported by any evidence, and the charge was quickly dropped by the Assistant State's Attorney, Will Brahms, a veteran prosecutor handling the case. When someone says in a glib fashion that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich, remember the indictment of Jameson. How did Wilson become a suspect? According to Morris and testimony in court, Wilson bragged that he had strangled SAPP. The first time he bragged about killing SARA SAPP was the day after the murder, when he told Tammy Barrick, according to court testimony in Wilson's first trial in March of 2000, he had killed SAPP. Barrick said she bumped into Wilson at a party the night of June 26, 1992, the day SAPP was murdered. She said Wilson smelled of gasoline and was drunk. In court, Barrick said that Wilson admitted he had done something wrong and had killed a girl, had strangled her, and set her on fire. Barrick also testified that Wilson promised if she told anyone about what he confessed to, she would be next. A jury trial in March of 2000 ended in a hung jury in St. Mary's Circuit Court. Assistant State's Attorney Brahms decided to prosecute the case again when the prosecution team learned that the vote to find Wilson guilty was 11-1, with the holdout being a juror who had lied during voir dire. The questioning of the jury about possible conflicts. They discovered too late that the black woman juror who was the holdout has a son who had been charged with murder, and she told other jurors she didn't trust the police. The woman had lied during voir dire when all jurors had been asked about them or any member of their family being arrested or charged with a crime. Wilson's attorney, Francis Sauer, opted for a trial by a judge instead of a jury in the second trial held in August of 2000. With Betty Jo Petty, she also used the name Betty Jo Mister, the second girlfriend of Wilson, that testified that Wilson had confessed killing SAPP to her. Judge Vincent Famia said he couldn't send anyone to prison based on the testimony of Wilson's two ex-girlfriends, both of whom had severe problems with drug abuse. The judge said he didn't believe the women. Wilson and his friends had been part of an endless series of drug and booze parties featuring casual sex, according to testimony presented at trial. On August 22, 2000, Judge Famia acquitted Wilson on all counts of murder, and he was free to go. Wilson has been back to court on other assault charges and domestic violence over the years. Raymond and Carolyn Sapp were very disappointed over the verdict that released the man they were certain murdered their daughter. They thanked the investigators for bringing the case forward to court. Wilson was beaten fairly badly after the trial by a group of men who may have administered revenge justice, and Wilson's mobile home caught fire in what was believed to be a case of arson, while the Maryland fire marshal ruled a wood stove started the blaze. The fire to the mobile home, located on Cartwright Road, just off of Fairgrounds Road, south of Leonardtown, took place about 1:30 a.m. on a New Year's Eve, not long after he failed to be convicted for the murder of SAPP in court. Would Betty Jo Petty have cause to lie against Wilson? Perhaps. Wilson filed as the plaintiff in St. Mary's Circuit Court on June 23, 1999, not long before Petty became a witness for the prosecution against him. In the court action, Wilson was asking the court to order Petty to pay him child support, an unusual event in that it usually is the female who goes to social services to help track down deadbeat dads and bring them to court or jail as needed to wring some child support out of their hides. In a custody and child support action in St. Mary's Circuit Court filed on March 9, 1995, Betty Jo Petty was also required to pay child support to Gregory Gill for yet another child she bore but didn't provide for or help to raise. Social services have also pursued Tammy Marie Barrick for child support. The common denominator for what united Wilson, Barrick, Petty, Kissel, and the murdered SARA SAPP was the party scene. The parties were held in the trailers at the Old Berks Trailer Park, which was formerly located on the parcel of land at the intersection of Rortant 4 and Rortant 235 in California, Maryland. The new shopping center featuring a Harris Teeter grocery, a sparkling series of stores and trendy eateries, completely belies the ancient past of a seedy trailer park populated in part by the working poor, and in other cases, a druggy culture of white trash, such as the aforementioned folk. SARA SAPP fell in with this crowd, but friends described her as a young woman who was captivated by life while addicted to the wildlife of sex, drugs, and endless parties. It was this side of her that brought her into contact with Wilson, her killer, according to those who testified, but not believed by Judge Vincent Femia, due to their own lives as dirtbag druggies. Barrick maintains a Facebook page which reveals her life as a grandmother and a gradually aging matron. Petty doesn't seem to have any social media presence or any contemporary criminal records, due perhaps to an array of aliases. Why did Wilson kill SAPP? Jealousy, one of the oldest motivations for murder. Was Wilson furious to find out he was not the only squire in the beer hall at Nokelby's, waltzing SARA around the bedroom? Her other boyfriend broke up with her just before her death. His name was perfect to put him at the top of the list, Gaylord Stalker. Stalker was cleared by investigators, but he paid a visit by a delegation of friends and family of SARA, and who informed him that he wasn't wanted at the funeral. Stalker was also part and parcel of the druggy crowd of cocaine and craziness. Stalker often sat in Nokelby's while SARA worked and ran up a tab, which she later had to cover out of her humble paycheck. A friend of SARA's told me that just before she was killed, she brought her photo album and gave it to her with instructions to give it to her sister Shirley. She offered all her money to me. SARA was a carefree kid, and she didn't take on her responsibilities, but she didn't deserve to die. The friend continued. She was all torn up, like she knew it was going to happen. It was like she knew she was going to die. She would get down on her luck and ask for help, and the next day would be her old, smiling self. In each week's edition of St. Mary's Today, a notice was posted with the number of weeks since SARA's murder, with a request for anyone with information to call the police. Included with the announcement was the photo of SARA's body lying in the field, covered by a sheet. After quite some time passed, SARA's mother sent me a letter. In the letter, she stated, "We appreciate you keeping the notice in the paper. and asked that the photo be replaced by one she sent clipped from a school yearbook. The article with the photo of the covered body wasn't intended for the family, as they needed no reminder of Sarah's murder. The weekly reminder was for the public who might have heard the killer confess as he slobbered in a drugged and drunken stupor, and in turn call the police, which is just about what happened. In any event, with a flawed 12th juror causing an 11, one deadlocked and hung jury, and a judge who couldn't stomach accepting the words of two decidedly untrustworthy disciples of the drug culture, Wilson got off the murder rap. Former investigator Daniel Morris, who cracked this case and was responsible for bringing it to trial both times, admitted they learned a lot about the need to do backgrounds on the jurors. We took their word, and she lied. More vetting of jurors should be done, and Judge Famia shouldn't have been on the bench then. He was retired. They let retired judges still hear cases, and it was unfortunate he couldn't have convicted Wilson. There remained one more person who was around Wilson the night he killed SAPP Clayton Kissel, who willingly spent a year in jail after admitting that he assisted Wilson after the fact in the murder of Sarah Marie Sapp. This element of the murder of Sarah Sapp isn't a whodunit. This is a case of one man going to prison saying Wilson did it. It all begs the question, will Wilson one day find his way to Council Bluffs to visit Kissel?